All right, MCU tier list, because why not? They're in chronological order, I think. We'll see. And for some of the earlier ones, I don't remember exactly a lot from the movies. Like Incredible Hulk, I haven't seen in over 10 years, but we're going to go with it and see how this ends up. Because the MCU has a lot of good, and now, thanks to the last couple years, a lot of bad. So, Iron Man 1 is an easy S tier. Still one of the best in the MCU. Great lead performance, obviously. Great melding of practical and visual effects. Very solid writing, a great arc. And this movie just is, I know cool is almost a superficial term, very subjective, but this is a very cool movie. The action in it is still great looking, like the terrorist fight scene. This movie just does so much well, and it's so simple. And when it comes to the writing, it's also genuine and it makes sense and it's logical and it doesn't look bad. And the villain, the last third, I guess you could say, is the weakest part of the movie, but the villain still, like, everything makes sense mostly. And it's just a great, great movie. So, easy S tier. Whoops. Incredible Hulk is going to go in E. Actually, I am going to get rid of this E tier because that's silly. We're going to do D for Incredible Hulk. I don't remember a lot. I think Edward Norton, I liked him in the role, but obviously, he got replaced by Mark Ruffalo. This movie visually doesn't look awful. I like Hulk's design. The fight scene with Abomination is decent, kind of cool, at least, once again. But this movie really doesn't have much going for it other than that. It's just kind of bland. We'll put it at D tier for now. Maybe that'll change. Iron Man 2, I'm going to put also in D above Incredible Hulk. We're going to put Incredible in F for now. Iron Man 2, as a movie, I still like a lot of. Still great performances. Like, I love Sam Rockwell in it. Still great action. Like, the final scene with Rhodey and Tony, that action scene is all great. And there's elements of the story and of the writing that are well done, like Tony coming to terms with the stuff with his dad and the idea of this, like, anti-Tony Stark in Justin Hammer. All that kind of stuff are good ideas. There's just a little too much going on for everything to be balanced properly in this movie, where they're trying to balance all that stuff and the stuff with especially Nick Fury and the Avengers and setting all that up, and the stuff with Whiplash, who is a pretty weak villain. There's great stuff individually, like I said, especially the heart of the movie being centered around Tony and his father, which does have some great scenes. But overall, you can clearly tell that this was a rush script, trying to do way too much. And I just wish that it was better. But as it stands, I mean, this movie is still better than a lot of what we would get later. So I'm going to put it in D tier. Thor, I'm going to put also in D after Iron Man 2. I am not a huge fan of this movie. I am okay with how Asgard's presented. Again, some great performances. Tom Hiddleston, Chris Hemsworth. Jane Foster is a pretty weak character. And once it goes to Earth, the movie just becomes a lot less interesting, which of course is just inherent to this plot and arc of Thor kind of learning responsibility and coming to terms with who he is and kind of this coming of age story. It's not a movie that I mind really, but it definitely is one that I'm not too crazy about. Captain America the First Avenger, we're going to put in C. This is a movie I quite like. Obviously, again, making lead characters here with Steve that are just so likable and have so much going on around them that it just makes for a really well-written character. And all the stuff with him, obviously, before he even becomes Captain America, is great in this movie. A great supporting cast as well with Haley Atwell and Howard Stark. And Red Skull I also really like as a villain. He is kind of generic, but I don't mind him. And even though the last third isn't great and how it kind of skips through some of the action, the actual last 10 or 15 minutes or so where he crashes the plane, wakes up, all that stuff is still pretty top tier. So this is still a solid MCU movie that I'm going to put at C for right now. Not great, but it is I'd say a 6 out of 10 roughly. It's got some stuff I like. The Avengers. We'll put it on S after Iron Man. Fantastic. Still has aged gracefully. The writing is top tier. Has all these characters that have already been established in their movies, that are consistent with their characterization from those movies, all colliding in really interesting ways that make sense logically, that make sense on a character level, and it's all perfect. A great villain, and just, this is a tight screenplay, and it's structurally very sound. It looks great. In terms of action, I guess in terms of cons, you can say sure it's lit sort of like a TV show, but I mean, who cares? If that's the problem with your movie that's well written, well acted, well scored, well nearly everything else, then you're in pretty good shape. So, S tier, Avengers, still one of the best. Iron Man 3, I'm going to put in C after First Avenger. I like this movie. I don't think it's. I don't know. Iron Man 3 is weird because there is a lot of stuff I like once again. I love the focus on Tony being on like by himself, like kind of in this bad situation where he doesn't have access to his technology and he has to resort to his, brain and not as much on the suit. Great idea for a movie. I also think this movie is really funny. Shane Black writes some killer comedy in this. Unfortunately, where it falters is as a plot involving Iron Man and the Mandarin with some silly choices with the Mandarin twist, ignoring nothing with any comic adaptations or no adaptation argument or anything. The fact that they have Aldrich Killian as so much more of a generic type villain than it seems like the Mandarin we would have gotten in this movie is a little disappointing. So Mandarin or Guy Pearce, Aldrich Killian, whatever you want to call him, is a very weak villain in my opinion. And I just think this movie would have been so much better if it focused not on all the extremist, fire-breathing soldiers, and if they just had Iron Man fighting Ben Kingsley Mandarin. I think that would have been a lot cooler, and you still could have had a lot of these character moments with Tony coming to terms with like who he is still as Iron Man and not being as reliant on the suit and stuff like that. And I still wish this movie had some great ideas like the PTSD from Avengers. That's a great idea that I wish it had focused on a little bit more. So this movie is almost like great. I just think it really drops the ball when it comes to the plot and villain. Thor: The Dark World. F. This movie is a bore. I hadn't seen it until right after Endgame, and I don't remember anything about it still. The Loki's kind of compelling, horrible villain. Jane Foster and Thor are a snooze fest. It's not a good movie. Nothing about it stands out. Captain America: The Winter Soldier. A tier. This is a great movie. It really solidifies Captain America as a very solid character, a very solid action hero. Supporting cast, especially Nick Fury and Scarlett Johansson, all work great in it. And this movie, obviously on a character level, is doing some pretty great stuff with Steve challenging his worldview set in the first movie, and obviously where it would go on to lead in Civil War. But for this movie, there are some great moments like the elevator fight scene, the speech he gives to everyone, and it just does some really great stuff for his character. And it's just a interesting, political. People like to call it a political thriller. It's not. It's not like it's inspired by political thrillers, I guess you could say. But even with having the real threat be Bucky, who he has this personal connection to with some great moments, but the biggest threat is, of course, Robert Redford's character, who isn't a physical threat anyway, which is always a little bit refreshing, especially for this. So this is great. There is some stuff in the third act with the helicarriers on a writing level that I don't know is aged super well because I haven't seen this movie in a little bit, but it is great. I love it. And A tier. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 is going to be an S tier. I also adore this movie. Once again, great writing, great comedic writing. James Gunn kills it with these characters. And this movie just has a ridiculous amount of genuine heart to it that it's hard to ignore and hard to not be swept up by. All the I am Groot moments, all the stuff rooted in Peter's character with his mom and them holding the Power Stone at the end. Great action, great use of music. It's what everyone loves about Guardians. This movie I think is great. It's once again a very solid way to do this ensemble of characters and have it all work when they're all introduced for the first time. In terms of cons, I mean, Ronan's pretty forgettable, but again, compared to what we got later, Ronan's fine. At least it makes sense that he's as powerful as he is because he has the Power Stone and he's a fine antagonist. But when your protagonists such as the Guardians in this stand out that much, then your villain being kind of bare bones isn't a huge issue. Age of Ultron. I am going to put... we'll do C, because there is, once again, stuff I like about this movie. I love the opening action scene. I love the idea of some of the, what they're doing, exploring stuff with the characters, Scarlett Johansson, such as Black Widow, and the stuff that Natasha was dealing with, and kind of all these different ideas, like people being afraid of the Hulk. Again, unfortunately, it seems like there's just way too much going on. Specifically, I think the biggest fault of this movie is in the villain Ultron. Instead of being this cold, calculated, like, monster, he's thrown out zingers, obviously based off Tony Stark, and that just makes him a lot less threatening. And I also think his design is kind of gross. But I still think this movie has some good action. I still like the last third, even though it is kind of a repeat of the first Avengers, just with the fighting, a big army. I don't mind it, and I'm never like dreading watching it completely if I have to. There is some stuff I like. I think Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are introduced relatively well here. Well, especially Scarlet Witch. Obviously, Quicksilver didn't get too much to do after that, but there is some stuff I like. I think the pacing's a little off too. We do spend a lot of time on Hawkeye's farm, which I actually like the idea of that. Again, I just think that the way everything is balanced in this movie is a bit muddy. So, movie that I don't mind, but certainly not great. Ant-Man, I am going to put at a... we're going to put it at B tier right now. That will probably change. Oh, God, I don't know. Actually, let's put it top of C. I like Ant-Man. It's a very simple movie. Not too deep. Doesn't have much going on. I do love how the shrinking looks. The action is fun. Paul Rudd is great. I like Michael Douglas. It is decently funny. It's got some good comedic bits with like Luis and all that. But it is a very simple movie. Not much to talk about. But it does have heart to it. It makes sense relatively, like most things. Especially, once again, compared to what we get later. And I do have a new appreciation for this movie after how the third Ant-Man was god-awful. So, a very tame, simple little heist movie. I like how low stakes it is, and I'm decently pleased with it. But most importantly, it established a pretty solid new character played in a very fun and compelling performance by Paul Rudd. Captain America Civil War. S tier. Very high up. I think this movie is amazing. It's phenomenal. Very, very well written. Once again, building on character stuff that makes so much sense, from Tony after Age of Ultron, from Steve after the stuff in Winter Soldier. It builds on those two especially in really, really logical ways that make sense. And that just applies to most of the side characters as well. Black Panther in this is the best he ever was in the MCU and is so great. Chadwick Boseman is so great in this. It has a great introduction to Spider-Man. The action, especially the final action scene between Steve and Tony and Bucky, is fantastic. And it just all is rooted in such interesting characterization of these characters, especially the stuff with like Bucky killing Tony's parents. And I just think this movie is compelling and interesting throughout. It looks great, except for some green screen during the airport fight. But it's so much fun during that airport fight, especially before things start going bad. But I just think this movie is nearly perfect. I love it. I also think Zemo works very well in terms of this movie. That final scene with him about to kill himself and then T'Challa steps in is a really powerful moment, and it's great. And I love this movie. I can't gush about it enough. One of my favorites. Doctor Strange, B tier. I feel like a lot of people don't like this movie, and I get why. It definitely is where you kind of feel the MCU churning these characters into a mold, this like Tony Stark, Iron Man type origin. But I really like Benedict Cumberbatch in this. I love how the action and visual effects look. I love the like Dormammu have come to bargain ending. Yeah, the villain's lame. Yeah, Rachel McAdams is a very whatever, love interest. But it does a lot of stuff that I like. It introduces some characters like Wong, and Mordo is an interesting side character in this as well. I do just like this movie. I'm never like, oh, I have to watch Doctor Strange. Like, it's usually keeping me interested, either through pretty solid writing or some cool action, which this movie does do pretty well. And it doesn't have any huge glaring flaws, I think, other than it does just feel by this point a little bit generic. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. A tier. I also really like this movie. Definitely, I don't think as funny as the first. And I don't love how CG goop some of the third act is, especially with the stuff on Ego's Planet, but where it lacks in that, it makes up for with some really, really compelling moments of Chris Pratt, some really compelling moments of Star-Lord, like coming to terms with the stuff with Ego, and then like getting closer to Gamora, and especially all of the stuff with Yondu and Rocket in this is great. And I just think once again he's so good at writing these characters. I forgot just how like this is a pretty like sad movie at the end. Like when they're all leaving the planet and they think they're gonna have to leave Peter, and Rocket's upset, and it's a sad movie, I think. And it has a lot of great scenes to it. I don't think it hits as hard as the first one, comedically, and especially with comedic timing. But there are some emotional moments that do hit as hard as the first movie, like the Yondu death, and like the very ending with the fireworks display and all that. So, movie that I like quite a bit, and I'm gonna leave it at A tier. Spider-Man: Homecoming. I am also gonna put an A tier, and this is a movie that had to grow on me for a little bit. I at first wasn't a huge fan of obviously this Spider-Man that's so naive and is so impressionable by Tony and just wants to like please Tony and all that. But I've kind of got a new appreciation for just how much of the high school Peter Parker struggle it does get right. There are a lot of moments that where I get that Spider-Man feeling that I want. And there's a good amount of time spent with him, just in the neighborhood doing like very chill Spider-Man things. And I love his arc of the film is like coming to terms with he doesn't have to be an Avenger and he can just be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. That for this movie is great. Granted, Infinity War happens and then it kind of goes out the window, and then I don't really love Far From Home, as we'll see. But this movie has a great villain as well. I really like Michael Keaton's Vulture. I really like Marissa Tomei as Aunt May. Again, I think she gets shafted in the next movie, but for this movie, I think she works well. There's still some stuff I don't love. Like, I don't love how the suit looks. I think this movie's got some wonky CG. The action in it isn't particularly great, but for what this movie is, I do like it quite a bit. I just don't think the sequels really built on it the very end of No Way Home did, but I don't think the sequels really built on it in a way that works super well for this movie as part of a trilogy. But for what this movie is, I do appreciate a lot of what it's doing. Thor Ragnarok. I'm also... we're going to put Thor Ragnarok at the very top of B. I don't love this movie as much as some other people. I haven't seen it in quite a while, and it is funny, I think. Hell is a solid enough villain. However, this is Taika going so hard on the jokes. Not as much in Thor Love and Thunder, but there were quite a few moments where the jokes did undercut some emotional beats, which was upsetting. And it's not as much as in Thor Love and Thunder, and I do think this movie has the heart that movie completely lacks, that is done in a pretty good way. Like, more building on the stuff with Loki, more, obviously, the Odin death, and Thor kind of, regaining his, I don't know, what makes him him, and not needing the hammer and all that, and, like, the scene on the bridge, like, I do like a lot of what this movie is. I just am not as big on it as some other people. So we'll leave it at B for now. Black Panther, I'm going to put in C. This movie is alright. It's got a pretty great performance for a compelling villain. And that's about... it's got some great, production design, a great score. But this movie, I don't think Black Panther is super compelling in this. I think he's fine. I like that he has this like worldview that is permanently changed by the villain in this movie. But this movie also has a lot of stuff that doesn't make any sense. It also has, even though the stuff with Killmonger is great, I feel like it doesn't really lead anywhere super compelling in that last third. Because the last third is a bunch of CG goop. The emotional moments don't really hit. And it just has some very, like, blah characters. Like, I like Okoye, but Nakia is, whatever. She doesn't have much going on. I just don't love this movie. I think it's got some stuff I like, particularly Killmonger, but this movie is, I don't think it's anything special, really. I think it's just a slightly above average MCU movie with some cool stuff. Avengers Infinity War. We'll stick in S tier. Obviously, what is there to say? Thanos is a great character in this. Very, very great antagonist. And just so many, like, gripping, crazy scenes like the fight between Tony and Thanos and the fight between Thanos and Doctor Strange. This movie has some really great action. Once again, all characters continuing to build off of their own characterization from their own movies and interacting with each other. And it just does such a perfect job at bringing all of this together in a way that mostly makes sense. There is some weird power scaling stuff that makes the writing kind of wonky with parts of this movie, but it really is great. And Thanos just carries this entire movie, really, and he is fantastic. Thor is also in this, the best he ever has been in the MCU. That scene where he comes down to Wakanda and the conversation between him and Rocket, it's all great stuff. And this really is the best of the MCU in terms of the benefits of having a shared cinematic universe. So, great movie, killer, 9 out of 10, I love it. Ant-Man and the Wasp, D tier. I don't like this movie. I didn't like it when I saw it. I don't, like, villain is, like, fine, Ghost. There's just nothing really, this is, I feel like, one of the parts where nothing really kind of starts, like, making sense. Like, I don't really know what's going on that made Ghost the way she is. I don't understand how, well, I guess we'll talk about how Janet was able to survive in the quantum realm, but yeah, this movie just doesn't have anything going for me. It still has a little bit of that heart that Scott had in the first movie, but he is so much, like, relegated to a secondary character in this after Wasp that he kind of just loses a lot of the stuff that made him interesting in the first movie. He's not as, like, proactive, and he feels like he doesn't have as much agency. So yeah, not a huge fan. Captain Marvel. We'll put Captain Marvel also in D. Not a huge fan of this movie. A very bland protagonist. What else is there to say? I mean, action's not memorable. I do remember this is one of the first MCU moments where I remember, like, cringing a little. I was like, ooh, this is not too great. And she just doesn't have a compelling arc in this movie, and it really does falter through the main character. On the plus side, Talos, Ben Mendelsohn, is great. I like Nick Fury. I like Coulson. Yeah, I think it's interesting how they tried to do the Skrull kind of subversion, but yeah, when it just really falters through being pretty visually uninteresting and being pretty bland on a writing level through a main character. So, not a huge fan. Avengers Endgame. Oh, the one that has... we're going to put Endgame in A tier. Endgame is this incredible, very awesome, fun ending to this story that I think gave a great ending to Tony. I think it gave a great ending to Cap. I think that it even gave a great way to go for, like, Sam Wilson going in the future. The final battle, logistically, is silly, but I mean, I can't ignore the emotions that I felt during that, which is, of course, my, like, subjective take during that. But I mean, this movie was crazy. I've never experienced anything like this, and I probably never will again. It was just such an emotional, like, high everywhere. And of course, there are some faults with rushing over the 5 years where stuff doesn't feel as developed. Hulk gets absolutely shafted where we don't see his development. We don't see Thor, especially. I think those two are really the main ones that kind of get the worst treatment in this, which is unfortunate since I think they both had a lot of great places to go. But there is some legitimately good stuff when it comes to character writing, like Tony and that conversation he has at the beginning, like all the stuff with Black Widow. And Nebula is also great in this. So there is some stuff that I adore. Thanos is weak in this, especially compared to how great he was in Infinity War. Time travel doesn't make any sense. So this movie is such a weird thing because it is like one of the biggest emotional movie highs of my life, and I'll never forget it. And it does have a lot of legitimately great stuff in it. It's also unfortunate that it's in this movie that doesn't really have enough time to treat all of its characters right, and it does shaft some people like Thor, like Hulk, and it also has this time travel mechanic that breaks the world. It doesn't make any sense. And yeah, so that's why it's going to go at A tier. But obviously the highs are as high as the MCU's ever been. The lows, unfortunately, just are they are very weak and they break the universe. Spider-Man Far From Home. We'll put it at C, at the very bottom of C. I don't like this movie that much. Actually, I don't really like this movie at all. For positives, I like the idea once again of Peter's arc. I love his suit at the end of this movie. I love most of Mysterio, and I love how the illusion scene looks. But there's so much in this movie that I think does a disservice to Homecoming, not properly following up on the May finding out he's Spider-Man thing, the entire plot being about Tony leaving these glasses to Peter, and then Peter gives them to Quentin, and just so silly and frustrating, and things that don't make sense, and how Mysterio works with these drones. And it's just a movie that logically, like I guess I should say logistically, doesn't add up in quite a few ways that I think makes it pretty bad. The action in it as well, other than the Mysterio illusion scene, is very whatever for me. And I don't love how the premise of Peter's arc in this movie is about becoming the next Tony Stark. Or obviously about how he doesn't have to be the next Tony Stark. But I don't think that's a necessary way to take his character after Homecoming, when that was a very big part of what he had just gotten to do in Homecoming, and about not having to deal with any Avenger stuff like that. Infinity War and Endgame happened, and obviously he should be mourning Tony Stark, but when that moment comes, when he's in the jet making the suit, that whether they start playing Back in Black or whatever, that moment for him being his own Spider-Man, I just don't like it. I don't think it hits well. I don't think it's necessary. It feels redundant after Homecoming, and I just think this movie builds so poorly off of that, and I'm not a huge fan of it. And as I'm talking, I'm going to put it at the top of D tier, because I really am not a fan of this movie. Do I do the TV shows? If I do the TV shows, we'll do them all at once, so we'll come back to them. Black Widow. Whoops. We'll put Black Widow in D tier. This movie has some good stuff in it. Not a lot. I like Florence Pugh and David Harbour. There's some spy stuff in the beginning. The first 2/3, you're watching it and you're like, okay, there's not much to talk about, until it really gets going in the last act. But the last act is stinky. It looks horrible. It's so large scale and silly and logically doesn't make any sense. And they shaft Red Guardian. What was it? The scene where he's singing American Pie. One of the only good scenes in the movie, really, is what wasn't even written by the writers. It was David Harbour's idea or something like that. So this movie, no. Taskmaster. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Awful rendition of a villain. Awful adaptation. This movie, maybe I should put it a little bit lower. Now that I'm remembering we'll put it after Iron Man 2. Actually, should I put Captain Marvel? I don't like any of these movies. All right, yeah, that's fine. Okay. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, is that what it's called? We'll put it at... Oh, God. C? Or should we put it at whoops? Or should we put it at B? There is stuff I like about... We'll put it at B. I'm feeling kind of generous. There is stuff I love the martial arts focus kind of in the first couple acts, and I think Shang-Chi is a perfectly fine, serviceable character, and I think his dad as the Mandarin or whatever you want to call him is good. Dare I say good? Unfortunately, this movie just loses me with so much dumb humor, dumb cutting of the stakes, dumb CG goop. The dragon stuff in the last act is stupid. It's so disconnected, I feels from what comes before. The dumb driving through a CG cornfield, the dumb Trevor Slattery's pet thing. This movie had it. It was killing it in the first 2/3. And then it just loses it, and it's so unfortunate. So actually, yeah, sorry. We'll put him at the top of C tier. It was just unfortunate. There is some action in this movie I like, but it's every time the action starts going, they go overboard and they start putting CG goop on it. Just let the martial arts people do the martial arts. Eternals. This is really bad. We'll do F tier. Um, yeah. What is there even a compliment first? Um, McCarty. I can't believe I remember her name. The speedster. Her speed looks good. Um, whatever Gemma Chan's character is, she was fine. Yeah, this movie has way too many characters with things that don't make sense. It has rushed like conclusions to these arcs. And this movie, more than a lot of others, I would say, has so much stuff that doesn't make any logical sense about what the Eternals are, why they were created, why the Celestials do what they do. It is a mess on a script and world building level. And it still is broken the MCU with that dumb Celestial that's in the middle of the ocean. So yeah, it's bad. It is bad. Spider-Man No Way Home. Top of A tier. Or bottom of A tier, I guess. This movie is so upsetting because it's great for a lot of different scenes and real stinky for a lot of other scenes. Um the good Tom Holland, his characterization for the most part in this movie, I really like. I love the idea of him trying to save the villains. I love Aunt May's death. I love the scene of Aunt May's death. Willem Dafoe and all the returning Raimi actors are great, along with their characterization. Mainly, I wouldn't say all. Willem Dafoe and Alfred Molina are great. Green Goblin is one of the best MCU villains now because he was nabbed from the Raimi verse and thrown in here. And they did a version of him that's different, but also still shares all of the similarities that made him great in those movies. A insane performance. The condo fight scene is great. Really everything in the last third is just fantastic. This movie does have some like fun camera work that's a little bit more interesting than what John Watts had been doing in the previous two films. The other Spider-Men are utilized extremely well. The whole coffee shop scene at the end is great. I like the score in this a lot more than I've also liked the score in the previous two Spider-Man movies. The final swing is great. Really everything with the last like 30 minutes of this movie is perfection. Unfortunately, the setup for everything is god awful. It doesn't make logistical sense what is going on with the Raimi villains. It hinges on a lot of coincidences and conveniences, which is unfortunate. A lot of this movie also still doesn't look very good. Granted, it because of COVID or what, or limitations, but that fight scene doesn't look particularly great. I wish the last third and the Spider-Man all fighting looked a little bit better than it did. So yeah, I would like also some characters like Sandman and Lizard just get like shafted. Things Sandman do doesn't make sense. Things Lizard do doesn't make sense. And yeah, I think that's about it. This movie also, it just has some silly decisions like Peter choosing, like I said, I like the decision of him wanting to heal all the villains, but he takes all the villains into his like Happy's condo in the middle of the city, and like that is not how I would have chose to do that. And it just feels very like contrived and a very like a script where they had this idea of where they wanted all these characters to be like an hour and a half into the movie, but the setup getting there is just poo. So a movie that I do like a lot of stuff, and as a Spider-Man fan, I can't deny how those last 45 minutes or whatever are just great. The whole rooftop scene, like there's so much stuff I love in this movie. It's just unfortunate that the setup for it is bad. Speaking of bad, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. We're gonna put it at the bottom of C. I like some of Raimi's creative direction in this. I like a lot of the goofy transitions and musical cues. I like a lot of the silly, goofy, like the music note fight and some of the horror camera work, which people say it's like not that, apparent over. But I mean, there is, I think, plenty of it in this movie. It's not like a crazy amount, but like the way he uses the camera is distinctively more fun, I think, in this and interesting than a lot of other MCU movies. So that is what I personally appreciate about it. What is bad about it is the writing, obviously. This is actually one of the most poorly written MCU movies, I think. Whether it be America Chavez's arc, all of the like themes it's trying to intertwine about Strange, whether it's Wanda's dumb motivation, whether it's the memory store like pad, whether it's the Illuminati, like it's yeah, this movie represents a lot of stuff I don't like, but it also has some fun Raimiism. So that's why it's gonna go at the very bottom of C. Thor: Love and Thunder. I can't stand this movie whatsoever. Super annoying. Nothing makes sense with the wishing well. Is that what it was? I don't even want to talk about this movie. It was just so grating. The jokes are the most annoying thing I've ever seen. It looks bad, like all MCU movies recently. Jane Foster is, I mean, was there like her relationship with Thor? I guess is the most interesting it's been, but it still isn't saying much. I hated it. I can't stand this movie. Just bad. Gore is at least kind of fun, and I like how the scene on the black and white planet visually looks. But other than that, nothing. Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. Oh, top of C tier. This movie, once again, I like the tone of it. Obviously, it's a lot more serious. I like Shuri's arc in it. Angela Bassett is great. I think the action is okay. Looks a little bit better than the first movies. But still, this movie has a lot of writing stuff that doesn't make sense involving Namor. Ironheart, I hated in this. She had no place in the story, I thought. But it does treat the passing of Chadwick Boseman pretty well. It does treat, I would say, most of its core Wakandan characters pretty well. I think it's a little long, and I think Namor is a fine enough villain. It's a movie that, like, I don't mind it. I think it's okay. It just has, like, I've never felt the urge to go back and rewatch it. And anytime Ironheart, Riri Williams was on screen, I hated it. So, whoops. Okay. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. F. Awful. The entire thing looks horrible. Kang is bad. Scott is also bad. Hank and Janet have no, like, purpose in this movie. Why Janet didn't tell them about Kang in the quantum realm is beyond me. Cassie is annoying in this. I don't think her actress does a particularly great job. Wasp actually has no purpose. It looks bad. It's meaningless. The ending is the most, like, clear redirect or reshoot I've ever seen, where he's like, I gotta stay in the quantum realm, and then he doesn't, and they all leave, and I just hate it. I hate this movie. Awful. MODOK was kind of funny, I guess, but even then, like, his final scene is, like, tonally confused. Awful. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. We'll put it in the middle of A tier. I really like this movie. All the rocket stuff is obviously very good. I think it treats most of its main characters pretty well. Once again, I think Nebula's great. Obviously, like I said, Rocket, Mantis, all that stuff. And Peter Quill, I also think, I love how they handle this stuff with him and Gamora. I think it was done very well after what Endgame and Infinity War shafted James Gunn. Yeah, really just, it is also genuinely funny. Great use of music, obviously, per usual. It just has a lot of great stuff, and I think it's a great ending. Like, I was, like, in a very emotionally charged movie, and it was good feeling that again from an MCU movie. This movie does have some stuff that I don't love. Like, I wish we're just like a couple of weird character moments, like the part where Mantis erases Drax's memory of them calling him stupid. That's such a obvious, like, oh, we can, like, mine this for character drama, and, like, kind of getting a resolution to Drax's thing. Like, why would you not have that scene happen and then that, like, lean into an argument, and then that moment later where they're like, you weren't born to be a destroyer, you were born to be a dad, like where that can like hit a little bit harder, where it doesn't really matter his intelligence because he has his heart and this like, you know, paternal instinct or whatever. Like, why would you not? That's just such a weird thing that she's like, sleep and forget this like conversation we just had. That's such an I really bothers me. It's like morally wrong. It's just like, I just hate it. This also has like some fake out deaths which are just absolutely unneeded. The Drax one, when they're in that asteroid planet thing, was like fine, but the Peter one really bothers me because it's just so unnecessary. It's just some weird like, just like a little bit more like emotion from the audience that doesn't make any sense. But yeah, a lot of great moments. I love like Yondu coming back for Kraglin and like that whole scene. Some stuff doesn't make great sense, like at the end, I think, with how they're able to get all these animals onto the others, like onto nowhere. But then every time there's something that seems a little silly, then they'll have a great moment like Rocket getting all the raccoons. And it's a movie that I think its heart and the emotional beats are so strong that it's able to carry most of the movie, even when there's some other stuff that's a bit silly. Is that? Oh, obviously the Marvels. Newest one. Uh, I mean, we'll put it in D, top of D tier, or relative top of D tier. Um, yeah, this movie is okay. No, it's not. It's not very good. I guess I went in with such low expectations that I just didn't care. Positives, I mean, Miss Marvel is fun. I like Amon Villani a lot. But other than that, literally, I mean, I got a brief chuckle out of the cat memory scene. But other than that, I have no positives. Negatives, I mean, I still don't think Miss Marvel is a particularly compelling character. Nothing, and I do mean nothing with the plot in this movie makes sense. And the villain, awful. The power scaling is completely gone by like nothing makes any sense with how Captain Marvel's abilities are fighting these people, and it's just silly. And the power swapping doesn't really make sense, and the alternate dimension at the end is stupid. And we'll see what they end up doing with that. Yeah, it's a very nothing burger of a movie for me. Like I didn't leave hating. I just was like, well, that was the Marvels. Like it was very underwhelming. Like just it was nothing. It was truly nothing. The only really upside was I think Miss Marvel and her dynamic with her family is pretty good. And yeah, that's the MCU. I didn't realize B tier would be so so like nothing, but B tier is weird because those are like the only two movies that I like that I don't think have like huge problems. See, like I don't think Captain America. Actually, let's do some rearranging because I think some of these are a bit too high. Black Panther: Wakanda Forever should be like right here. Shang-Chi, I think it's just those two. We'll move here. We'll move here. Captain America, I think, should be above all of these. You know what? Should we just put Captain America on B tier? Would that be too crazy? Let's do it. Yeah. Ant-Man C, Black Panther. Let's move Wakanda Forever above the original Black Panther. And I honestly... Okay, we'll put Shang-Chi. All right. I think I'm happy with that. So S tier... These have always been my top 5. These will always be my top 5 for a long time. Love these 5. And then these are some movies that I really like, even if they have some flaws. Perfect. Thor Ragnarok, yeah, I'm cool with this. Ant-Man, Shang-Chi, Wakanda Forever, Iron Man 3. That works. See, these are hard because, like, I enjoy anytime Iron Man's on screen more than, like, most of, like, these later movies. So, yeah. I'll have to think about this little chunk right here. D, The Marvels, Iron Man 2, Black Widow, Captain Marvel, Thor, yeah. And yeah, this is stinky. And, like, even Incredible Hulk at least has, like, a cool scene. But I hate these movies. Actually, Let's screw it. Let's put Hulk on D tier. Because I hate these. Hulk, I don't, is very like whatever. Okay, cool. So yeah, that is MCU movie tier list. Not going to do the shows because I don't really like any of them other than the first episode of Miss Marvel, the first episode of like Moon Knight maybe, and like the first couple episodes of WandaVision. Yeah, and the Doctor Strange episode of What If. I think that's all I like from the shows. And I liked seeing Daredevil again in She-Hulk. I don't think he was disrespected too badly. So, yeah. Anyways, that's the tier list. We'll see where this lovely franchise goes. I hope it gets better. Probably won't. In fact, it'll probably just get worse. So, anyways, that's it. Toodaloo.